Hi, this is Amy McKay, and I'm going to read to you today from my memoir, Daughter of Family G. I'd just like to introduce the readings by telling you a little bit about the book. I often refer to it as a genetic memoir, and that's because it traces part of my family's history, specifically with cancer, all the way back to the mid-1800s. But it isn't a book about sadness and despair. In fact, when I was writing it, I found a lot of joy and hope and lessons about the power of story. Specifically, a story that was told by a 23-year-old dressmaker in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1895. It would move through time, and it would become something that would lead to one of the biggest medical breakthroughs in history. In fact, that dressmaker was my great-great-aunt Pauline, and if it weren't for her and her story, I might not be here today. So this reading is for her and for all of you who are listening. Thank you. And I'm going to read two passages. One is from the prologue, which is titled In My Blood, and the second is from a chapter called Ruffles and Lace. When science offered me the chance to glimpse my future, I took it. What it didn't show me was how to live with what I saw. By the time I received my results, I'd witnessed the wreckage of cancer in my family several times over. I'd lost people I loved, admired, and adored. How was I to cope with knowing that same fate lurks in my blood? As a child, I listened to the women in my family tell stories of the past, grandmothers, aunts, and cousins sitting around the kitchen table with my mother, sometimes laughing until they cried, sometimes sobbing through words of grief. They spoke of relatives who lived before I was born, people who came from nothing, who faced great hardship, who died too young. The women in those tales stared down death, looked after the sick, and conversed with fate. They spread the truth through story, even when others didn't wish to hear it. This is how I learned that stories have power. To make sense of the world, to give voice to dreams, to nurture hope and banish fear. What I didn't know then was that those stories would provide me with what I need to navigate life. Sometimes the best advice on how to live comes from listening to the dead. I am now 50. My sons are young men. My mother and the women who sat around her table are gone. This book is my attempt to keep their stories alive as I come to terms with what lies ahead. Looking to the same place science has gone for answers, to my ancestors, my family, my blood. I wrote my way between their past and my present, chasing after voices in hopes of finding mine. It was a journey that revealed truths shared across generations and secrets hidden in the stacks of worn journals and yellowed papers. Each discovery led to another, creating a twisted path of revelations that wound between old homesteads and graveyards, research laboratories and hospital archives, groundbreaking scientists, and long-lost family. Every encounter brought new connections and stories, and with them came a new narrative of understanding. The world is now a place where facts and information are at your fingertips. Genomes are regularly sequenced to find your heritage or understand your DNA. Current research shows that 1 out of every 279 people has Lynch syndrome, yet only 5% have been diagnosed. A simple spit test can determine a myriad of health concerns a person will likely need to address in their lifetime. A new era in medicine has arrived. Information is power, science says. It saves lives. Yes, absolutely it does. And our stories keep us whole. This is Ruffles and Lace. Scott's Bay, Nova Scotia, June 15th, 2018. As the sun sets over the bay, the evening sky is awash with brilliant strokes of red, pink, violet, and blue. This particular kind of near summer light has been considered a sign of hope in this tiny community for centuries. Red sky at night, sailors' delight. Tomorrow will be smooth sailing. Turning from my studio window to my computer, I focus on one last bit of work for the day, a meditation on an image that's come to me across the miles and through the ether. A digitized slide of a tissue sample from Pauline's cancer, a pathologic ghost. It too is made up of reds, pinks, violets, and blues. It too is in my view at a moment of transition, from day to night, spring to summer, 1 month shy of the 99th anniversary of Pauline's death. A few days after that milestone, I'll celebrate my 50th birthday, and this year-long expedition into the inner depths of my existence will come to an end. The cellular portrait of Pauline's cancer is part of a collection that the University of Michigan's pathology department has painstakingly created for me from family G tissue blocks they retrieved from their archives. The process involved several steps, each requiring steady hands and a meticulous eye for detail. Razor-thin ribbons of tissue from cancerous tumors had to be extracted from the decades-old paraffin blocks, then sliced, cleaned, set, and stained before they could be magnified for digitization. They've sent 22 images in total, 8 from Pauline's endometrial cancer in 1919, 7 from my great-grandmother Tilly's first cancer in 1931, and 7 from her second in 1933. All of them were made when the sisters' lives were hanging in the balance between life and death. To Aldred Warthen and his successor Carl Weller, the original samples taken by their own hands had served as physical evidence of the theory they so desperately wished to prove. To me, the image of Pauline's cancer symbolizes hope, even though I know I'm looking at deadly chaos, nature gone awry. I'd seen images of her cancer before today, but they'd been grainy, black and white figures scanned from a blurry photocopy of an article in an old medical journal that had been gathering dust on Dr. Lynch's shelf. Looking at them had been like peering through old windows streaked and mottled with dirt. Still, they'd been the only portraits of my great-great-aunt I'd ever seen. Today's images are fresh. They're in saturated hues that are so shocking to my eyes. The details are clear. I can zoom in like a satellite moving its gaze from the outer reaches of space to a single glistening raindrop perched on the tip of a blade of grass. Every whirl, spot, curve, and swirl of the disease is crisp and clear. Staring at the canyons and tributaries of Pauline's fate, it occurs to me that I should probably find someone who knows the finer points of histology to sit with me and translate the images into language I can understand. Not yet, I think. For now, I'm content to gaze at it in wonder. What strikes me most about it are its delicate intricacies. The deeper I go inside the image, the more I'm reminded of the shirred ruffles and dotted toile, French knots and Swiss lace of Pauline's dressmaking. Placing an image side by side of Tilly's first cancer next to Pauline's, I look at them, orchestrating a moment between the two sisters that they never shared in real life. Their endometrial cancers occurred over a decade apart, and yet they contain similar features, just as the living sisters had. Is it wrong for me to feel such an attachment to these slices of illness, disease, and death? Am I manufacturing meaning that isn't there? This is the same question I ask myself every time I sit down to write. I once asked the internist who'd performed all my colonoscopies how he managed to identify cancers during a scope. Comparing it to identifying birds, he'd said, "It's a balance of probabilities. If I see a Baltimore oriole in the backyard, then within 0.1 of a second, I know what it is. And I know what it isn't. But if I see an older flycatcher but don't hear it calling, I have to take further steps to identify it. Take a photograph and analyze the ratio of the tail to the body and so forth. Some of it is pattern recognition, some of it is actual measurements, and some of it is experience. If you want to identify something properly, you have to be willing to see it in many different ways. I've spent the better part of a year examining my fate through the lens of science, story, history, memory, and being. The big picture is no less complicated than it was when I started. but it is clearer. Every observation I've made while sorting through the past has led to understanding, discovery, and meaning. If you want to properly tell a story, you have to be willing to write it 1,000 ways. And then you must be brave enough to share it. Thanks for listening. See you later.